Let's start with Rodgers. What's going on? He's still not a Pittsburgh Steeler. We are almost it's almost a week away from the NFL draft at this point, and Aaron Rodgers is still not a Steeler. Kind of a big deal. Kind of. So, like, again, what is the holdup? What is going on? Adam Schefter has his thoughts. He says the ideal timeline for Rodgers is before the draft. And my response to that is, yeah, like, obviously. He says if Rodgers decides that he wants to play in Pittsburgh with new teammates, new receivers, new coaches, a new offense, and a new city, I would think that he would want to be there, boots on the ground from day one of the offseason program so he could be on the field. Now, he could put this off more and wait longer. Sure, he could do that. It's not like it's a hard deadline, but if you're going to be going into a new situation, don't you want to give yourself the best chance to get acclimated to everybody and everything within your power when the offseason program begins? Yeah. And with that being the case, the ideal timeline was a month ago. At some point when free agency first started, like that would have been the ideal timeline. Everyone would know that Rodgers is going to be a Steeler. Everyone could prepare for that. He would be on the team, and it would just be a nice little thing to know with your draft preparation. And the closer you get, it's kind of nice to know who your quarterback's going to be for the upcoming season. That's all. Because right now, we still don't know. The reports are out there saying we'd be fine with Mason Rudolph, but we also still have an offer out there for Aaron Rodgers. So how fine with Mason Rudolph as our quarterback are we really? I believe it to an extent. I really do. But we've also said a lot of positive things about Mason through his years of being a Pittsburgh Steeler, and typically that didn't turn out too well for Mason Rudolph. That would be something, though, huh? If Mason somehow makes it through this whole offseason with not only the Rodgers buzz, but even before the Rodgers buzz, the talks of us bringing back Fields or Russ or maybe even a Sam Darnold, and then Rodgers becomes the only quarterback available. We end up signing Mason, and Rodgers is still out there. So the talk obviously turns to, okay, we have Mason and Skylar Thompson. Mason's obviously the front runner in the clubhouse right now, but this Rodgers thing it's gonna happen, right? This is gonna happen. Now we're, a month removed from that. Rodgers still isn't here. Mason, still the main guy. And then we still have a whole draft ahead of us too, with a bunch of these quarterbacks being linked to the Steelers at 21, or even being linked to the Steelers in the third round, fourth round. But, like, what if Mason somehow, some way gets through this whole offseason unscathed? And the Steelers are going to draft a quarterback. We're going to pick a guy. But it would do Mason wonders if that quarterback that we pick is a third rounder or fourth rounder. He may actually be the Steelers starting quarterback for 2025. It would be one of the craziest redemption stories if he pulls it off and plays well. If it's a disaster, not as much of a good story, because if anything, if you're just talking about Steeler lore, it would be better for Mason to have just left it at 2023 if 2025 ends up going bad. But that would be crazy, given all the unluckiness that Mason's had to deal with being a Pittsburgh Steeler. If he actually somehow made it to 2025, all the landmines, he wasn't even on the radar for us. Talking about quarterbacks and options this offseason, the month or so leading up to free agency, when we were sitting at February, when the season was over in January, was anyone thinking Mason Rudolph for Steelers starter? I don't even think we were legitimately considering Mason for Steelers backup. I don't remember having that conversation or doing a segment. None of that. So that would be crazy. That would be absolutely crazy if Mason makes it through the offseason and is the leader in the clubhouse for the Steelers starter. I think he would be if we get a guy in the third round. Open competition if we pick someone in the first. And Mason would have a chance. He would at least have a good chance, I think a 50-50 shot of starting week one. How short is that leash? That's a different story. especially if we get someone in the first round. I don't think we'll be that hesitant to put the rookie in a month into the season, 6 weeks into the season, if things aren't looking up to snuff. But there you go with Rodgers. Adam Schefter gave his best guess of when Rodgers signs. Should be this week, next week, at some point before the draft, at least. At some point. And with this Rodgers situation being up in the air, you got other people like James Palmer from Bleach Report said this on Bleach Report's YouTube channel. Shout out. Saying that the Steelers got a clock on Aaron Rodgers at this point, and some within the organization are losing patience. And I could see it. It just depends, though, who within the organization is losing patience. Is it the right people in the organization that are losing patience that could actually dictate this thing to start speeding up and put a hard deadline on it? Because if it's just players and certain people on the coaching staff, maybe lower level guys, that doesn't matter. Because if Tomlin's willing to give Rodgers however long he's willing to give him, then yeah, it doesn't matter how many people are getting upset or losing patience. As long as Tomlin, Kahn, and Rooney are willing to give Rodgers some leeway here, then that's the only answer. Those are the only people in the organization that you really got to care about with this decision at this point. But here's what he says. As of right now, everybody is being patient. So right now, yeah, the impatience isn't completely there. But I could see people getting a little irritated, though. I mean, you heard Rooney, and it was like a couple weeks ago when Rooney did his little interview down at that, I think it was that coaches symposium or that big NFL meeting that happened. You heard in his tone that he was like, you know what, we're willing to wait, but not forever. Even you could see with him, he's like, I really didn't expect this to take this long. And now we're, what, a week and a half, 2 weeks removed from that. So again, it just comes down to the power dynamics behind the scenes. Who are the people that are losing the paces? Who are the ones that are getting the most irritated? Because if it's Rooney, all right, that's kind of a big deal. That's the owner. Tomlin, maybe, him and Rooney have conversations where Tomlin's telling Rooney, because Tomlin seems to be the one that's most willing to give Rodgers some leeway here in his timeline. If Tomlin's willing to talk to Rooney and say to Rooney, like, hey, listen, we can continue to wait, and Rooney listens to Tomlin, then still all is good. You could keep waiting. But if Rooney or Kahn, they overrule Tomlin and all this and say enough's enough, then there you go. But he says people still believe this is the most likely landing spot for Aaron Rodgers. The way it impacts things is they'd like that answer, and they may start pushing him, to my understanding, as we approach draft week. So there you go. Kind of goes hand in hand with the Schefter timeline. We're starting to have some sort of clock. Steelers didn't want to put one on it, but it looks like we're starting to have some sort of clock now where this is going to go. Deadlines make things happen. The draft week is potentially, in a lot of people's minds, a deadline for Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, it should be. It should be some sort of deadline, some sort of checkpoint at least. Now, I don't think just because we draft a quarterback means that Aaron Rodgers can't still sign here after the draft. I think it just depends on the quarterback and how much investment we put in that quarterback. And that will make it, that could change the degrees of awkwardness. Because if we get Shedeur at 21, or we trade up for Shedeur a few picks at 21, and Rodgers still isn't here, I think that's a weird dynamic. I've said it multiple times over the past week. It could work. Rodgers could sign after the fact. I just think the hype, the momentum, all that's going to be there for Shedeur. And I don't think it's going to be as much there for other quarterbacks that you could draft in the first round, or even any other quarterback that you just draft, period. But there's just something to be said for, we get a guy like Shedeur of his caliber, his cachet, and he's excited to be here. Rodgers, you're still not here. You've had a month and a half to make this decision. I think people are just going to start turning towards Shedeur as like being the guy, because the more you drag this thing out, the more Shedeur becomes acclimated with his teammates. He takes over the role of being the guy. And that's one of Shedeur's strong suits, of being a leader. Like, you saw that in the multiple stops that he's taken throughout college. He's been able to help turn programs around. So, I don't see why he wouldn't be capable of doing that with his NFL team either. So, yeah, I think with Rodgers, there's got to be some point you make this decision here soon. So like before the draft makes it clean. If if it's after the draft, you're leaving doors open for the Steelers to maybe not even have an offer out for you. Shedeur's the one guy. I think that's the one guy where maybe the Steelers could revoke their offer, just start to say it's too late, we've moved on. All the other quarterbacks, offer still on the table for Rodgers. But we don't have any real news with him. This is just, this is just some reports that are out there. This is some, I guess, stuff that we could ruminate on. We could react to, at least when it comes to Rodgers and the Steelers. But we're in the same spot. It's just we're closer to the draft, and we're further removed from free agency starting, further along in this offseason process. And I'm telling you, from my standpoint, and I'm a Rodgers guy. I've been on record saying I wanted him here from pretty much the start of free agency. It was between him and Fields. The further we get removed, and the longer it's taken for Rodgers to make the decision, like, I'm almost to the point of being ready to move on. I'm almost there. Not completely yet. I'm not. Let's see how the draft goes. But it's getting a little annoying. Getting a little annoying from a fan standpoint. All right, let's talk a couple things with Shedeur, though. He had a meeting with the Steelers last week. Came in for a draft visit, and it went pretty well. Shedeur rated it a 10, and Peter Schrager on the Pat McAfee show even had some more details. Said the meeting went for 5 hours. I think that's how long Aaron Rodgers' meeting was, right? It wasn't like 5 or 6 hours. Says he had a really good meeting with Pittsburgh last week, and it lasted like 5 hours. And he met with Arthur Smith, met with Tomlin, went around the facility. So that, to me, seems like a good backstop. Like, worst comes to worst, Shedeur at 21 would be a really nice place for him to go. Yeah, I think it would be. I think it would make a lot of sense for both sides. I think that would be a fall, because Shedeur was obviously predicted to go in the top 5, predicted to go 2 or 3 early in this draft process. I think slipping to 21 wouldn't be the worst thing. You see it a lot of times with quarterbacks that are highly touted, but they fall into good scenarios, and it ends up being really beneficial for their careers. Aaron Rodgers, speaking of the guy, he is one of them. He was being talked about of potentially going number 1. I think up till draft day, no one really knew for certain whether it was going to be Alex Smith or Aaron Rodgers. 49ers ended up going Alex Smith number 1, but people were thinking Rodgers is still going to go in the top 5, top 10. He's the number 2 quarterback, and it's not much of a difference between him and Alex Smith. But he slips all the way to the Packers. Packers still have Brett Favre. They take Rodgers anyway. They view him as the future, and you see how it turned out for Rodgers. Yeah, it can happen. It's worked out. I've brought up other scenarios in the past. Lamar Jackson with the Ravens. They had Joe Flacco still on their roster. They took Lamar Jackson anyway. He sat for a good portion of his rookie year, but came in and wasn't fully up to speed or anything, but gave them a spark. And then year 2 is whenever things really started to click. He ended up winning the MVP and everything. And, the rest is history with Lamar Jackson and his NFL career up to this point. So, yeah, if Shedeur goes to the Steelers, I think that's a lot better for him. Just knowing that the Steelers have a certain base, have a certain foundation, have a certain culture already established here, where we're not going to be god-awful. We know that. We know we're going to be at least in the mix. We're going to be around 500. We're going to be 9-8, 10-7, year in, year out. We got a good roster. We got a certain level of quality coaching. Now, is it to the degree that we want it? No, it hasn't been, but that could be a really good structure and base for a rookie quarterback to walk into. Absolutely. So that's that with Schrager, and then we got one more thing regarding Shedeur Sanders, and this has to do with his fit with Arthur Smith as an offensive coordinator. Jordan Schultz said today that, yeah, I had someone who I trust tell me that if you bring in Shedeur to Pittsburgh, he actually is exactly what an Arthur Smith would like because he's going to do what you're supposed to do. He's going to play in the pocket. He's going to run your offense. And I've said this. I think Shedeur is probably further along than people realize in the sense that he's played a lot of football. Jackson State, Colorado, won a lot of games, and has not had great offensive line play. Uh, How do I want to react to this? Yeah, I don't really know what Arthur Smith's exact type of quarterback is, to be honest. He's had so many different guys. Tennessee, it was Mariota, and that was, I think that was more on Mariota just not being that good, though. Mariota, and then he helps reinvent Ryan Tannehill's career. He goes on a nice, year and a half run with Tannehill in Tennessee, and then he gets the head coaching job with Atlanta, goes through Desmond Ridder, Heineke. He had Matt Ryan for a season there. Who else? I think there's another quarterback I'm missing, but I mean, Atlanta doesn't really tell you much about Arthur Smith's ideal quarterback. Now, Desmond Ridder coming out was supposed to be an accurate passer. So if there's a comparison there to Shedeur Sanders, I would say Shedeur Sanders is way more accurate than Desmond. But I don't think. And then if you look at Arthur Smith with the Steelers, he's had two different style quarterbacks there. He hasn't had one archetype quarterback. Really, if you look at all the quarterbacks that he's dealt with, from Tennessee to Atlanta to the Steelers. But to Arthur Smith's credit, I feel like he's made it work for the most part with what he's had. You can't really say that in Atlanta, but honestly, for them to go 7-10 in 3 years with those quarterbacks, none of those quarterbacks, Matt Ryan on the back end of his career, wash Matt Ryan, Desmond Ridder, and Tyler Heineke, man, I don't know if that was much for Arthur Smith to work with, is what I'm trying to say. And Mariota, I guess he had Mariota with the Falcons too, but also he had Mariota with the Titans. Can we just agree those four quarterbacks aren't good? Matt Ryan on the back half, and then the other three quarterbacks. Those just aren't good quarterback scenarios. Ryan Tannehill, I think, is a big positive for Arthur Smith's resume. And then what he did last year with Fields and Russell Wilson. Fields being mobile, a good arm talent type of quarterback, good arm strength type of quarterback, extremely talented, and then just not fully proven just yet from a quarterbacking standpoint. To have Fields for the first 6 weeks of the season and then to go to Russ and have success with both of those guys, different styles, I think it says something. And going back to reinventing Tannehill's career, because I don't think Tannehill was really that good, just point blank period. But he had that run. I got to give credit where credit's due. He did have that run in Tennessee. So I don't know exactly what Arthur Smith's style or what quarterback he's covering. Now, I'll say Shedeur Sanders is different than all those quarterbacks Arthur Smith has dealt with. So maybe this is the guy. So once he sees Shedeur Sanders, he's like, this is the guy that I finally want. This is how I want to tailor my offense towards. But I would imagine he would like a little bit more mobility from his quarterback, though, than what Shedeur Sanders has. Looking at what Fields brought to the table and Tannehill, and both of those guys, it seemed like Arthur Smith had an affinity towards. Whereas with Russ, we know how, that dynamic has been reported on. But again, Arthur Smith, he could switch up his offense for any quarterback. I think he's pretty versatile. He did make it work with Russ for, those first 7-8 weeks that Russ was the starter, and then it went downhill, and who knows exactly what happened in terms of how the power shifted with the play calls and the audibles and what was going on behind the scenes between Smith and Russ. Who knows? We don't know that exact story, but the only two games I really knock Arthur Smith for were maybe the last two or three. Yeah, it was the Chiefs game, the Bengals game, and then the wild card game. That's it. Outside of that, the majority of the season was pretty good from an Arthur Smith offensive coordinator standpoint, I thought.